Do you want to de-stress, get your priorities right in business, and just live a bigger life in general? Then this episode is for you. We're going to share the process to do just that through journaling. Hello, Sales Nation, and welcome to today's episode of the Salesman podcast. On today's show, we have Ollie Aplin. He is the author of The Mind Journal, which you can find at mindjournals.com. And that's exactly what we're talking about on today's show. We're diving into the conscious versus subconscious and how journaling can potentially be a bridge between the two, how we can de-stress, how we can find priorities in sales, business, and life, and a whole lot more. So with all that said, let's jump into today's episode. Ollie, welcome to the Salesman podcast.
Hello, nice one.
I'm glad to have you on, mate. We're going to dive into a topic which is slightly different than usual, but the theme of the show, my goal of the show is not just help people hit the targets, to help them thrive in sales, help them thrive in business, and this will hopefully help them in that area, and I think it's going to help them just in life in general. So we're going to talk about journaling, and it's something I've done for years. I know you've got kind of a vested interest in this. You've got a whole load of knowledge to share. But I want to tee this up with a ridiculous question that hopefully you're going to laugh at. And if it goes one way or the other, it's going to be a very short show. But first up, journaling, this process, is that just for arty-farty blokes? Is it for people who just got too much time on their hands? Is it for people who are just weirdly in touch with their feelings? Or is it for everyone? Does it have potential benefits for everyone who's listening?
It's the second option. It's absolutely for everyone. I mean, I think because it's so versatile and it's based on you as the user, as to kind of how and what you want from it. That makes it sort of accessible to all. So I mean, I've got guys in the audience from, right at the top kind of CEO level kind of guys running big companies, right down to the sort of guys that are in a very vulnerable state, might be on the kind of edge of things and just need a bit of help and guidance. So I mean, that kind of spectrum, if you like, is so wide. So I think that's why it works for everyone.
Definitely. And I want to get into the specifics and the practical application of this and how we can implement it towards the end of the show, perhaps. But is there a definition of what journaling is? Because it's lots of different things from outside looking in. It's seemingly lots of different things to lots of different people.
I mean, I suppose there's that kind of misconception with journaling that is it just a diary? Is it kind of, Bridget Jones's diary kind of thing? Is it just where I'm just logging my day and just venting kind of all the crap that's happened and just putting it down in a place? And it's kind of, I see it a little bit more than that. I kind of see it almost a bit of a bit of that kind of tracking aspect, but also a bit more creative in the sense of you're really exercising through some of the issues or frictions that you're having in your day-to-day life. So it could be that you've got something coming up that you want to kind of, jot down or kind of, look at and analyze and work out why you may be getting stressed about it. Or you might have done something last week that's still niggling away at you and you want to kind of figure out why that's still holding you back and you're not maybe achieving your goals or doing things or hitting targets. And you can explore all that kind of stuff that you're not necessarily willing to kind of deal with in a kind of external factor with friends or colleagues or whoever else. You can do it in this kind of private way where you can just reflect on yourself and kind of go, I'm not quite happy with me at the moment. What's that about? And you can just dissect it. It's not so much a kind of dear diary, today this happened and I felt great or I felt crap and then that's it, job done, you go to bed kind of thing. It's more productive than that. It's more kind of driven and exercise based.
So we'll split it into two here then, so we can keep narrowing down and make it as practical for the audience as possible. So I do both elements of this personally, and just to give context, I just have a Microsoft Word document, and every day I jot what I'm doing throughout the day as I go through it, of the interesting bits, the boring bits. It's also probably a little bit of procrastination as well. I'm sat in the office all day as I'm either recording or editing, so it gives me that 30 seconds, 40 seconds just to switch tasks. And I also talk to myself through it, which we'll touch on in a second. But there's also the element of, it's nice to look back 2 years ago, see how much of an idiot I was, both like in business and personal life and stuff as well. And then I think I've been doing it for about 8 years now. So I go back to, my journal goes all the way back to my first medical device sales job. And the moment, one of the best posts I see every year as I look back over it, the moment that I left, as I was journaling, I made the decision to leave the role. My mum was ill at the time. I moved back up north to Leeds from down in Chelmsford in Essex in the UK, and that moment is now recorded forever. And that is a really nice moment to look back on, because that was a really like profound and instant kind of decision and mindset shift that I made to kind of live a bigger life and change my priorities. But putting all that stuff to one side, because I think there's value in that, I'd love to talk more about this idea of, I think you used the words working out or processing things. So I've got an example of this, what I did yesterday. I was setting so halfway through the year, I was setting a financial goal to hit by Christmas. And thinking about it in my head, and I've got a notepad that I write stuff down in to do essentially an ongoing to-do list. I was kind of, well, I want this figure, but I'm not really sussed out how to get it. But then as soon as I took that to the journal, and again, tell me if my process is totally wrong here, Ollie, and there's a better way to do it because I'm intrigued. But I just sat there and went, well, this is the goal. And I'm talking out loud, essentially, but into the screen. And so I'm typing away and I'm going, well, this is what I want, blah, 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 blah. And I'm going through it all. And by the end of 25 minutes, I'd broken everything down. Everything had been processed. Everything had been worked out. There was specific steps. And if I'd have tried to just do that in my head, I would have probably got some kind of results, but it wouldn't have flowed. It wouldn't have been as many layers deep as if I type it on the screen. So am I doing something right here? Is that the gist of what we're talking about when we're journaling and trying to process things?
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting point there that you make between the kind of digital and the physical. You know, you're tracking your stuff in a kind of digital form in terms of you're using Word to kind of just track your stuff. And then when you're trying to figure things out and you're trying to kind of process quite heavy kind of decisions and goals and working out how you're going to work, achieve them, basically, you need to kind of like process that in a different way. And trying to do that in a digital form doesn't work. Our brains just don't necessarily kind of activate in that way. It activates better in kind of written form when you're actually there mapping this stuff down. And it's partly due to the fact because your brain almost has a moment of sort of just calmness and a bit of quietness when you're trying to solve those problems in your head, and you're trying to just race them through and bash them into kind of like the keypad on Word. You're not actually giving your brain enough time to kind of process that stuff and then articulate it into sentences and words and proper structure with everything else. And that's what I find has been the sort of most powerful part of analog journaling, if you like, actually physically writing that with a pen and paper, to achieve, really good results like you were just sort of describing there.
Yeah, and I don't know how in depth you've gone into this, but there's certainly studies that show that when you write things down versus type things, you remember them better for whatever reason. There's a connection between your physical movement and versus like pecking at keys. But I also, and I'm going to butcher this a little bit, and you might be able to guide me if you looked into it, but there's certainly a lot of research that shows that your brain's either side of it, one's analytical, one's more creative, to use the cliche ways of describing it, but they don't mesh very well together. It's difficult to talk from one side. Well, there's a big area of the brain that separates the two sides very literally. But I find when I'm typing stuff, it's almost the voice in my head that is speaking and the words are coming out. Whereas when I start to write, I very typically won't write in full sentences. I'll be drawing diagrams. I'll be doing other things. And so I've always thought that if you're typing, you're using one side, not necessarily like literally using one side, but you're leaning on one side of your brain. Whereas when you start to write things down, draw diagrams, because I'm a visual learner, so I'm picturing things on the paper and perhaps tapping into the other side of my brain that's not quite so loud during the day. And it's perhaps one side of your brain is going, hey, listen to me, this and this is all your doubts and the devil on your shoulder, kind of describing things and putting you back in your place and again having those doubts. Whereas I find the other side, as soon as I sit down and write things out, those kind of get pushed away, if that makes sense. I'm talking quite so usually on the show, if someone says what I just said and it's all wishy-washy and sounds a bit hippie, I usually shoot them down for it, but I don't know any other way to describe it, and that's just my experience with it.
I mean, I think what you're describing there is like an emotional connection to what you're writing down versus when you're just bashing the keys on Word to kind of get stuff out. You're literally just processing, through just typing on your keyboard. You're just processing that noise, that voice, like you said, in your head. Whereas when you write, you're actually tapping into an emotional state. Whether you're aware of it or not, there's been studies that have shown that actually we can record our emotions, and we can connect with our emotions completely differently, even more differently than if we was to talk about them out loud. We connect with our emotions so drastically differently in written form when we're actually physically writing. We're able to kind of process those emotions more easily, or at least connect with them in a different way. And then that's the long lasting kind of change impact that we have, because we can look at what we've kind of maybe written for our goal, and we can say, oh, okay, well, look, I've set this target for myself of, I want to earn X by this date. But then there's this emotional state that kind of goes, but how does that make me feel? Do I feel now even more stressed out about that? What's that? Am I excited? Am I driven? Am I feeling really, pumped up to do that? Or am I actually a bit nervous? Am I a bit anxious about that? You can't necessarily process that information when you're just using something digital, like typing it up. That's very much a kind of analytical kind of, that's my goal, that's what I need to do. And then you crack on, because it's almost like a to-do thing.
And I love this, because it's the two sides of sales as well. It's you're here to hit a target, but then the only way you can hit the target is by having empathy for the customer, by being there for them, supporting them. And so there's that weird paradox in sales always of, you have to give first before you can take. It's almost the same thing of, to get a good result, you have to have an end goal, but then look at the emotional path to getting there, because anything that's long, well, I know for me personally, anything that's longer than about 45 minutes, I just can't hack it. I've got no willpower. There has to be an emotional reason for me to do it. Otherwise, I can't stick with it for the long term.
Yeah, no, totally. And I'm exactly the same with that. And I think, that's just another good point around kind of just, again, just tapping into that emotional state and just being able to kind of go, okay, that's realistic. I feel okay about it. And that's one thing that I always I ask myself in journaling a lot is, okay, how am I now feeling about that discovery, or that plan, or that thing that I've got to do, or that thing that I've done? It always comes back to an emotional state. Because we are, we're emotional beings, and we're driven by our emotions. And I think once you kind of tap into that stuff and you feel okay about it, you can then start maybe feeling a bit more confident about what you've got coming up, or, feeling okay about what you've done or what's happened in the past. And you become almost a bit more present around, okay, I'm not so much kind of focusing on the future stuff that's coming up. I can kind of go, I've mapped that out, and I've mapped the past out, and I can kind of go, right, I'm bang back in the present. What do I do? What do I do right now? How do I feel right now about this?
I love it. And I've got so many examples of what you just described, which is amazing, Ollie, of I would be subconsciously worrying about something. Of, if you ask me, I'm not bothered about that. It's not a big deal. But then there's that little bit of ongoing stress. And this is in sales and business and just life in general. But then as soon as I write it in the journal, it pulls me back to the moment. And we'll go through this in a second of what questions we should be asking ourselves regularly. But I'll ask myself the question of, why are you worrying about that? I'll write it down, and it sounds so simple and daft when I say it, but it works tremendously. I'll write down the 2 or 3 reasons that I'm worried about. And as soon as then you look at it on a piece of paper or on the screen or wherever it is, and you see that, 99% of the time that isn't going to happen, and the worst case scenario, you're likely to be fine anyway, then it's like a feedback loop that is just going on and on and on. But when you see it and you make that definition, it's almost like one side of your brain is worrying, but it can't see itself worrying. But then when it sees on the paper that the other side of the brain has said, oh, don't worry about it because X, Y, Z, then this one just shuts off and calms down. So with that said, and that there's no science behind that. That's my gut feeling of to put in words the process that I feel when I do this. But to give some practical steps here, Ollie, and we'll dive into the process of journaling in a second. But what questions should we be asking ourselves, daily, weekly, monthly, to evoke some of these insights that we can drive benefit from, whether we're journaling or not? Are there any questions that we should be asking ourselves regularly?
I think we all ask ourselves questions with, on a regular basis, daily, weekly, without sometimes even being aware of those questions that we're being asked of ourselves. And I think sometimes people kind of go around trying to find the answers to these questions that are either subconscious or, that you're constantly going over in your head of like, how am I going to achieve this, or how am I going to get that done, or what should I be doing about this? That kind of, most of the time when we kind of talk to ourselves, it's usually either in a kind of not a negative way, but usually in a kind of like, oh, how am I going to do this, or what should I do about X situation? And I think most of the time when we're sat with those kind of questions, we try and go off and find the answers to those things, but the actual answer just always just lies within ourselves. We know all the answers to our own problems. All of us do. It's just you need to ask yourself the right questions at the right time, but then also give yourself the right space to answer those questions in the right way. And I think that's where, again, journaling comes back into its own, is that we're all different, and then we all have our own different sets of questions and objectives and goals and everything else. And I think it's just taking that time to sit down and have that moment to kind of ask yourself what's right at the top of your kind of like head, if you like, and therefore answer that question to yourself, because you'll know the answer, you'll know the way out, you'll know the solution, you'll know how to kind of get the result you want. And it's not usually, you'll never find it as clear as what you or how you answer it yourself. Like for example, I'm always looking for like the solution out there. So I'm reading books, I'm reading articles on Medium, I'm listening to podcasts, I watch YouTube videos and TED Talks, and I'm like, there's got to be this answer to this thing out there somewhere. You know, we're just trying to like just consume our brains with just information, thinking we'll solve it. And actually, what I sometimes find is that if I just sit down and just ask that question to myself and give myself like 20 minutes to just answer it, I'll figure it out. But it's almost like sometimes we just don't allow ourselves time, and we don't give ourselves that kind of trust almost to sort of say, you know, I can figure this out. I just need to just think for a minute and just allow the process of just writing it down and going through it. Again, like you were saying earlier on around like this, you know, the stuff that you was planning for kind of the end of the year, you knew the answer. It was in there within you. You just needed that space to kind of just play around with it for 25 minutes. So in terms of answering your question, I think it's, you know, whatever those questions are that keep reoccurring, it's those reoccurring questions. Find those, write those down, and then just keep looking at them and try to answer them yourself. Don't try and find the answers elsewhere. Answer them yourself.
I think you just give me real indirectly or directly here, Ollie, I'm not sure, but you've given me real clarity on something. So forget the audience listening and yourself. Forget everything I just spent 10 minutes talking about with the left and right brain. What it is, seemingly, is my subconscious is constantly throwing stuff at me and bubbling stuff up, which may be useful, probably is. But then my conscious brain is too focused on, well, I've got to record this podcast, I've got to get these edited. And so it's not in the moment, and so it's not listening. So it's almost like when I write, it's almost like my subconscious has just that brief period to just throw little tidbits in there, which is the insights I needed all along, as you were describing, that come from within. But I'm just not, until I'm sat there writing and giving it a little bit of space for these insights to bubble up and get past this like dumb, how to describe it, your dumb consciousness that just is focused on more probably staying alive versus the longer term survival of you and your family and your wealth and friends and everything else. You're just not giving yourself the opportunity to do that. So
well, it's like, just quickly,
sure.
It's like when, I mean, how many times have you ever found the solution to a problem when you wasn't even thinking about the problem? It could be that you're in the bath, you're in the shower, or you're in the cinema, or I don't know, you're on a commute and you just, you know, I don't know, nodding asleep to the bump on the train, or you're in some kind of mundane situation where your brain finally switches off. I don't know, you're down the gym and you're just plowing on the treadmill, and you're all of a sudden this light bulb goes off in your head, and you go, oh, that's what I need to do. And it just comes out of the blue, but it's because your noisy mind is finally just sort of shut up, and the subconscious has finally come through and gone, look, this is the root of it. This is what this is how you solve it. It's here. It was there all along. You just needed that moment just to switch off a little bit. So yeah, you're totally right.
And this goes into a further conversation of something that we've talked about on the show recently a couple of times, but probably needs more thought. Is there's this culture in sales, entrepreneurship, business at the moment to always be hustling, to be doing crazy long hours. And I'm real, and I don't do it all the time, and I should do. I'm going to eat my own words on this slightly, but you should have at least one day off a week. And I find that if I have that one day off, the next day I do twice as much work as what I would have done, and I'm ahead of myself because all these insights come on that day off. When you're like, yesterday I was watching the Bellator MMA fighting, and I just sat there chilling for 3 hours watching that. And I had a pen and paper with me, and I was jotting down loads of notes of how I want to do this next big deal with this company that we're working with now. It's Salesforce. Everyone in the audience I keep trying to not mention names because the deal isn't done yet, but everyone knows who I'm working with, so I'll call myself out on it. But I'm trying to put together a bigger deal with them. So I was sat there watching the fighting, watched grown men beat the crap out of each other, and that little bit of space and shock and horror perhaps give me that space to have loads of insights. I had a whole page of A4 of what I can do to essentially help them and grow their brand, and I might as well plug them while we're talking about them, but their blog, quotable.com. I had more insights doing that than if I would have, at the end of today, just tried to do another couple of hours or squeezed a bit more in. And so I don't know your thoughts on this, and there seems to be data and research on this as well that shows that people are more productive when they have 1 or 2 holidays a year and take a day off, at least once a week.
I mean, I overwork myself. I struggle to find balance. I'm kind of like, I'm the typical kind of entrepreneur, if you like, where I've got, this new business that I'm trying to get off the ground, and I'm still juggling my kind of commercial design work on the side, and I'm not that kind to myself, and I'm not that kind of aware of the fact that I need to sort of, put the brakes on sometimes and just chill and take the day off. But I think that's where kind of having the right tools around you to kind of make sure that you are looking after yourself, even if you've only got like 10, 15 minutes to do something because your day is absolutely stacked and you can't take that whole entire day off to kind of just completely just wind down and switch off. There are things you can do that are very light level, 10, 15, 20-minute exercises just to kind of look after either your body, your stress levels, your mental fitness. And it's finding those things and sort of weaving those into your kind of day and into your week to make sure that you almost kind of stay at not only kind of optimum performance, but also that you're just looking after yourself and you're not just burning yourself into the ground, so that actually you either get ill and you've got to take 2 weeks off work and therefore you can't do any deals, you can't sell anything, you can't do, you have to just shut down, or you just become completely counterproductive. Tasks that should be taking you 20 minutes, 10 minutes are taking you, 3 hours, and it's 11 o'clock at night and you're still going, and it's just like you're trying to write a proposal that you can do this, and you're just taking forever on it. If you can just find those 10-20 minute kind of slots just to look after yourself, then it'll reap the rewards in the kind of long term, where you won't have to kind of sacrifice those kind of long stints of time off, sort of thing.
For sure. Other people have said this. I don't know whether Gandhi stole it, but it seems to have come before him as well. But and I've told this story on the podcast before, so I'm going to butcher it as well as I did in previous times I've tried to tell it. But he had an aide or whoever come over to him and say, you've not got time to meditate today. And his response was, well, I need to meditate for twice as long then. And this is what I feel about a lot of what you just described then, of that you could do this proposal in an hour if you were refreshed, but then it takes 3 or 4 hours when you're tired. So the maths of that seems quite obvious, of go and chill for an hour or 10 minutes, whatever it is, to just reduce that end number. And the payoff is usually in the favor of meditation, which we talked about on the show before, which we don't need to dive into because that's kind of like a hot topic of whether it is typically hippie and nonsensy, or whether it's not whether, there is a whole load of science to back it up, the way that it changes the physical structure of your brain over the long term, or journaling, which is what I want to come back to in a second, of how we can perhaps fit that in a 10 or 15 minute process, whether it is going lifting weights for half an hour, even if just lightly, just to kind of drop your stress hormones or give your stress hormones something to do. They're there to get you to run away from a big cat that's chasing you, not to deal with your sales manager who's pestering you on the phone because you've got a report that's late. There's multiple ways to, which is amazing, which is what you were diving into then, Ollie, of breaking down these, because a lot of it is physical hormones in your blood that you're trying to break down and change, as well as the mindset, mental side of things. So with that all said, how can we, we'll use Sam the salesman as the example. He's got a bright red-faced sales manager who's constantly pestering him for everything. He's getting calls from his customer from 7 a.m. till 9 p.m. every night. Perhaps he gets one day off a week, which he can recharge. But during that week, can he use journaling as a tool? Considering he doesn't have 4 hours to sit and just ponder on life in general, can he use journaling as a tool to help him think through things, process things, and put things in context and perspective?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think this, in that case, the shorter the better. And I think, if Sam can ask himself one question, I would always probably say that one question to be, what's the major block right now? What's the number one thing, if I had to just throw that thing right up to the top, that's causing me the main blockage on my productivity right now? And what happens usually then, when it is your list more than one, because you can't help yourself but go, right, well, I think it's this, I think it's that, and then before you know it, you've got a list of five. There'd be a list of, like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the one at the top is there, but you just instinctively will want to write more. And that's the key right there, is the fact that you've written more, so you've got that stuff out of your body, out of your head, and down onto the paper. So you can look at those 5 items or 10 items or however many you've ended up filling out, depending on how stressed out you are. And not only is that cathartic to look at and go, oh, bloody hell, that's a lot of stuff that I'm feeling a lot of blockages in. But you can look at that top one then and go, okay, well, I know that's the one. Or actually, is it the one? Maybe it's that one there. And then you can start to go, actually, I thought that was the one, but this is the main thing down here that's the block. I'm going to solve that right now, and that's going to free up all this other stuff, and I can move forward. And if you do that exercise on a regular basis, either throughout the day, every time you hit a block, or you find yourself just getting absolutely overwhelmed and stressed out, and you're just not achieving, then I even say it to my clients, when they come to me and they want to work with me, I always say, well, what's the number one thing that you're struggling with right now? And they instantly come back with more than one, but it gives us a starting point to kind of go, okay, well, look, let's look at all this stuff and actually analyze and say, is this one thing at the top the one thing, or is it something somewhere else? And then let's start processing that stuff. That would be kind of my tip, and that's the kind of way that I use journaling throughout the week to kind of make sure that I'm staying on track and I'm feeling okay about things. And in the most important case, it's kind of saying, okay, well, then how is that block making me feel? Like, now I've discovered it and I found it out. How am I emotionally connected to that block? Is it making me angry? Is it making me feeling guilty? Is it making me feeling sad? Is it making me feeling, really low and depressed? What is the emotional state to that block that's there? And then how can I look after that emotional state? What can I do to kind of make that emotion kind of go away or replace it with a positive one? And again, if it's like too much adrenaline, like I'm feeling really pumped, I'm feeling so excited, I'm going to, my head's going to blow up. It's like, okay, well, then how can I just breathe a little bit more to kind of bring that back down again and have a bit of calmness? What would I do in that sense to kind of level that emotional state back out again? Because we can't always be, like down here and then all the way back up here again and just be on this kind of like, up, down thing. We need to try and find a little bit of balance. And I think using journaling in a kind of weekly way in your kind of daily kind of productivity stuff to kind of just balance out the flow of the week, for me, has been a massively powerful tool. So that's my kind of tip, if you like, on it.
Yeah, so we always promote, and obviously there's no one size fits all, but I say me and a lot of the guests kind of align with this. We promote that salespeople should get up, get to work, do whatever, but then when they sit down in front of the laptop, shouldn't be being reactive. They shouldn't be dealing with emails, phone calls that are coming in right that second. They should either clear the plate of all the emails and get back to not necessarily inbox zero, but get to the point where they're in control of things. Or they should do, if they've got to do any cold calls, cold emails, or anything that's routine, they should block out those first 2 hours of the day, get them done, or any really shit jobs that they don't want to do, get them done. I think it's Brian Tracy describes it as eating the frog. If you get that frog eaten at the beginning of the day, the rest of the day is looking good. Versus if you're planning on doing it at 4 o'clock, you're going to be miserable all day before you get to that moment. But it seems like once you've done that, you've done your time block, you've done your most important tasks of the day. This is a really good question to ask, because then it allows you to align your priorities. And if you come up with 5 things, 4 of them are probably nonsense, and there's probably one thing that's going to move the needle more than anything else. I mean, and that reminds me of, have you read the book, The One Thing?
No, but it rings a bell.
So the premise of the book is that, and we've had the co-author and a couple of members from the team on in previous episodes, but the premise of the book is, ask yourself, what's the one thing that makes everything else redundant and obsolete? So the example that I use on the show is, if I get to, the goal has always been 1 million downloads a month. We're about 600,000, 650,000 probably this month moving forward. If I get to 1 million downloads a month, It means I can hire people. It means that there's enough revenue to support it as a nice little business. All the kind of revenue and business problems all disappear. So I focus all my energy on just growing the show's audience, versus when you start to break that down into smaller tasks, you can get super lost. And I will spend time, for example, without calling them out, I get asked to do roundups all the time, as I hate the fact that anyone thinks I'm an influencer, but that's the label that's put on me. The premise of the show is that I'm learning from the audience, from the guests, from yourself, Ollie, as much as what the audience is. So I hate being labeled as an influencer, but because I've got an audience, people call me that. So I get asked to do these roundups all the time, and I cancelled on one that is potentially a prestigious one. It was a video call that they wanted me to do, and I cancelled it because I asked myself this question again of, is it going to help me get more people to listen to the show and grow the audience? A little bit, maybe. It's going to lead to better business relationships within that company who want to sponsor the show and do work with us, but it's not helping me grow the audience. So I use this question to essentially cancel that and reallocate that time with producing content or reaching out or working with people or recording, which very linearly does grow the audience. As in, the more content that we put out, if I double the amount of shows that we put out in a week, we get twice as many downloads. It's as simple as that. So that's got to be what my focus is. And this all ties back to this idea. And you were saying the same thing, but with different structure of, if you can find out the biggest leverage thing that makes everything else redundant, you'd be silly not to do that one thing, right?
Yeah, no, totally, yeah. But again, it comes back to that emotional. Yeah, I always find it has to come back to the emotional state of what that one thing means to you. So you mean again, you highlighted it there, which was like your purpose is to drive the amount of downloads that the show gets. So your emotional state to the deal that you was potentially going to take was not wholeheartedly. You wasn't really fired up about it. And as an emotional thing, you wasn't like, hell yeah, this is going to be an amazing thing. You was actually more emotionally drawn to this thing where you're like, no, my core passion and my thing that's driving me, that my heart is kind of really fired up about, is this thing over here where I really drive the audience and grow the audience.
Is that a life lesson in itself of we should spend more time doing the stuff that we actually give a shit about? Is that maybe that's the crux of the conversation here, but is that something that we should, almost, obviously there's times when you have to do stuff you don't want to do to get to the place you want to be. I'm not saying that we should all be dossing around, skiving and faffing, to throw in some British slang there. But is that something that we should always have at the back of my mind of, we should be doing the things that emotionally we want to be doing?
Well, those things will always become a bigger and better success, I believe. But I think it's about processing your emotional state towards the facts that you have in your day. So that if you feel okay about those emotions, if you're okay with the deal and you're okay with it not feeling right and it being a little bit kind of like a bit angry about it, but I'm going to do it, just because of the fact that you've accepted that emotion, you've accepted that it's not entirely what you want to do, but you're going to accept it and you're going to pursue it and you're going to make it the best you possibly can with that kind of frictional kind of emotional state in it. Just you being mindful and present of that emotional state is the key to then that thing becoming probably a really good success, even though it's not what you truly feel that you want to do. And that's the core thing. It's not just kind of saying, here's all the facts of the day and the facts that I've got to deal with, and that's crap and that's really good, so I'm going to just do all the good stuff, because just life doesn't work like that. But if you're okay with the emotional kind of feelings that are connected to them all, and you just have a bit of time and moment to kind of process that stuff, then you're more likely to kind of go into it being mindful of those things and just feeling a bit more okay about it. It's just connecting your emotional state to the actual events that are going on around you.
So just so I can clarify myself on that, and then we'll dive into the process of what we do when we sit down and write in a second, which is obviously the most important part of this episode, the practical elements of it. But just so I'm right in my own head, Ollie, are you saying that it's more important to know the emotion that we've tied to something, acknowledge it, and then just do it anyway, versus, because clearly we have to do, as I said before, we have to do stuff we don't like to get to places that we want to be. Otherwise, everyone would do the easy stuff and everyone would have success and there'd be no value in it, and so there won't be success. But do we need to acknowledge it, do it anyway, versus if we don't acknowledge it, is the problem that then we have this underlying just stress or discomfort, and because we can't put a finger on what it is, that becomes more and more stressful over time.
Yeah, and it's exactly that. And then what happens there is that you then kind of vent your frustrations in other things, because you kind of make a decision. Well, it can't be that, because I made a decision to do it. And so you kind of vent your anger at other people around you, or other businesses, or yourself, and you almost self-sabotage in different areas of your life, because you're like, well, it can't be that thing. I'm okay with it, kind of thing. I'm just going to crack on with it. And that's the danger, is because you haven't actually connected the feelings to the action that you're actually going to take place and do. And if you go into it mindful of those feelings that are attached to it, then you're more likely to go into it wholeheartedly, rather than just getting angry and bitter and just sort of throwing that stuff in other directions. So yeah, I mean, it's not about it's not about the whole kind of like, trying to find the easy route and that whole kind of thing. It's just a case of just being more mindful. That's basically it. It's just being present of how those things are actually making you feel. And it sounds really simple, and it sounds really kind of wishy-washy, but it's actually very powerful in terms of actually getting things done. And then when they are done, you feeling okay about the fact that you did it to your best ability, or actually didn't work out, but that's fine because I was okay with it at the beginning, or whatever it was. So yeah.
Makes total sense. Okay, so we have a 15-minute window. We've got a pen, a paper. We're stressing out about something or other that's at the back of our mind. Like very, very literally, and hold my hand and talk me through this. What do we do when we sit down?
What, to journal?
To journal, because we've gone pretty deep, pretty quickly in the psychology, the subconscious, left, right hemispheres, and all this. But what do we practically do? I'll cut this out as a soundbite as well, of just for people who kind of didn't listen to the whole episode, so they can take something away from this. But we sit down, we've got a pen and paper. How do we journal?
How do we journal? Well, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, the way that I journal when I'm not using Mind Journal, which has got the prompts in, and I'm just kind of free journaling, if you like, where I'm just kind of just thinking off the top of my head, or just, it's almost like consciously just writing. Or what's it they call it? Where you just write with a stream of conscious kind of journaling, if you like. But I can't really ever get on with that. So I always need prompts. I always need like a kind of visual task set at the top of the page that's going to be like, right, this is the action for this journaling session. So I always kind of start with the date, because I need to know what day it is, just in case I want to look back and go, right, cool, I was in the right old state last week, or whenever that was that I wrote that thing. And then I always ask myself kind of, how am I feeling right now? And then I just list down the feelings that I can feel in my body or in my head, or I just give myself a good kind of 2 or 3 minutes just to warm up to the exercise, if you like. Because it's like anything, you don't just plow into the gym and just start lifting all the weights that you can and doing crazy stuff, or just going on a mental marathon. You need to warm up those muscles. So I just kind of warm up my mind and my body and my hand into writing, just to kind of go, how am I feeling right now about stuff? So jot down all the feelings that you're feeling, and then ask yourself, why am I feeling that way? So then that's almost like another task that you sort of set yourself. So you can go through that and kind of go, I think it's because of this, and I think it's because of that, or this event happened yesterday or today or whatever it is. So you're being more kind of like factual. You're supplying the facts and the evidence to those feelings. And then I ask myself kind of, how would I like to feel? How would I like those things to make me feel? And so it's back to kind of like listing the emotions again. So you're kind of almost having a bit of a cool down moment. And then if there's a core kind of thing that's blocking me, like I was mentioning earlier on, or if there's a fundamental goal that I've got for the week, or a task, or whatever that main objective that I'm having that's there in my head that I've kind of been mulling over for 2 or 3 days, I write that down as a question. I try and formulate it into a question as if I was asking a friend. So I go into this kind of like dialogue, if you like, where I imagine myself as my best mate, and I think to myself, right, I'm going to really help him through this thing now. What's your problem? And I wait for him to kind of give me a response. I write that question down, and then I try and answer it and try and kind of it sounds weird, but try and give him the sort of support and guidance that I would want him to give me if I was in that state. So it's kind of like you can then essentially almost like step out of your kind of normal ranty kind of self, and you can then start being very quite, kind to yourself, productive, strategic around how you're going to solve this problem emotionally. And then before you know it, that's probably a good 15 minutes gone, and you've written maybe an A5, A4 sheet of paper. And then I end by reading it back through and just kind of processing all that stuff that I've just written down, and then that's an entry done.
Love it. And we'll come on to Mind Journal in a second, but I've got one final question to wrap up the show. It's something to ask everyone that comes on, Ollie. I know you're not an out-and-out or quote-unquote sales professional, but clearly you're a designer, you're an entrepreneur, so you'll have an answer to this for sure. And that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling?
I would say to him, just try and be a bit more patient. I think the one thing that I've learned in the kind of 10 years that I've been running various businesses and doing various different kind of launches of products is that not all sales are instant. So, and I'm someone that kind of demands kind of instant sales, instant kind of conversion. If the page or the site launches and no one's buying, then it's shut it down. We move on to the next thing. And what I've learned is actually you need to be patient with yourself, and you also need to be patient with the audience, because sometimes you might be launching something where you're in a completely new space. The audience isn't even necessarily there, and you just need time to kind of organically kind of grow that. So I would go back and say to him, just try and be a bit more patient, man, and just try and just chill with things just a little bit longer. Yeah.
I love it. Well, if the audience ever went back through my kind of small business history, there's probably been about 500 businesses, and this is the only one that's had real success. And this is the only one, and I don't think it's a coincidence, it's the only one that I stuck with for, I gave myself 12 months of really nailing it and really sussing out what the audience wanted, which was a podcast, because we were doing blog articles, we were doing videos, we were doing all kinds of stuff. And the audience, the only thing that they cared about, the only thing I ever got emails about was the podcast. So I continued doing that, and I'm just starting to see the success of all of this kind of two and a half years in. So that's kind of, it's interesting you say that, because I think I'm on the same wavelength of I need some kind of instant gratification with a lot of these processes, and a lot of it is long term, and a lot of it is just journaling's probably the best way to deal with it. Of you write down 6 months ago that you're working on this deal, you process it, your thoughts, and then I like looking back when the deal closes at that original moment, and every time I look back, I'm like, oh, I was an idiot to think that it was going to close in 2 weeks, when if you really thought about it, damn well it's going to be 6 months. So I appreciate that, Ollie. And with that, tell us, we kind of like hinted at it, and this is this is the best way probably to journal and to put everything that we talked about to practice. But tell us a little bit about Mind Journal, where we can find it, and then where we can find out more about you as well, sir.
So Mind Journal is the new book that I've created. It's taken about 12 months to kind of fully kind of create and design, if you like. And it's a kind of guide to journaling specifically for men, but I've got quite a few women using it as well. So it's like I said, it's journaling's for everyone. It's filled with 30 prompts, guided questions. There's a blank page for you to kind of put your entry in as well. And it will explore all the different areas of your life. So it will look at your relationships, your personality, what you're happy with, what you're not happy with, your state of work, what you want from life, goals, all this kind of stuff. And it's kind of mapped out in this kind of structured way, where it starts off very simple at the beginning. There's very kind of light task-based kind of exercises just to get you going. And then as you work through it, they kind of get tougher and tougher, and you kind of dive into kind of more emotional things and plans that you've got for your life, or if things really hit the fan and you was really stuck, what would you say to yourself? And you can map out a bit of a plan for those kind of things. So it's a real kind of end-to-end kind of journey of self-discovery and sort of self-improvement. You can find it on Amazon in the UK, so just head to Amazon and just search for Mind Journal. And if you're in the US, just get in touch with me and I can send you links to find it in the US. But you can go to mindjournals.com and you can find out all about the movement, the mission, the product, that's the best place to go.
Good stuff. Well, I'll link to all of that in the show notes to this episode over at salesmanpodcast.com. And Ollie, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for coming on the show, because probably when I reached out to you, this was a slightly odd request to come on perhaps a sales podcast to talk about this, but I think it's crazy relevant, and there's loads of value for the audience in journaling, in meditation, in just becoming more self-aware of yourself. I think you can better serve your customers as well. And with that, mate, I want to thank you for joining us on the show.
Thank you very much. Nice one. Cheers, Will.